the task force, the committee members, for your continued commitment and engagement. I know these times are challenging and uncertain, and I know everyone in this group has a demanding job and other responsibilities that have been made much more difficult by the pandemic and over the past 6 months. So thanks for showing up. Thanks for continuing to lead, and for continuing to assist us in developing strategies to help Maryland overcome the civil legal challenges that have been brought to us by COVID-19 and by structural racism and other systemic inequities. I want to give a special acknowledgement to our partner, the Maryland Access to Justice Commission, the Maryland State Bar Association, for their outstanding work on behalf of the task force. Their support has been critical to advancing our efforts. I'm guessing that most of you have heard that last week our office, along with the governor, announced $11.7 million that will be directed to the Maryland Legal Services Corporation to continue to fund legal services to families who are facing eviction and other housing security issues. $8.7 million of the funds were recovered by our securities division in a residential mortgage-backed securities case. And after we made whole all of the counties, the state, we still had an additional $8.7 million that we had to devote to housing purposes. And this seemed perfect. The governor added another $3 million from state general funds. We recognize that there are many other worthy organizations, and many of them are represented on our task force and on our committees, and we need to support their work as well. But the fact that we were able to find this level of support for civil legal service providers is due in large part to the thoughtful and persistent work of you. So thank you very much. Today, we're going to consider several additional short-term proposals addressing access to housing, affordable healthcare, and public benefits. Hopefully, you've had a chance to review the 3 letters that were circulated by Rena earlier this week and are ready to share your thoughts. Now that we've seen the real impact of that our advocacy can have, we must continue to amplify the urgent needs of Marylanders, particularly for our most vulnerable populations, the communities of color, Black and Brown, who've been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Looking beyond the short-term items, we've continued to winnow down our long-term proposals for reform, and we are replacing the 45 draft recommendations we reviewed last month with 14 consolidated, updated, and reorganized recommendations for your input and review. Again, I want to thank the committees for their extraordinary productivity. We have one more meeting left before we prepare our final recommendations, and we're well on the way to offering a comprehensive, innovative, and practical list of policy reforms. Everyone's input is a critical part of that process, and we've set aside a significant portion of today's meeting to hear your thoughts. Before we do that, however, it's my honor to introduce our guest, James Sandman. Mr. Sandman is chair of the ABA COVID-19 task force, on which our own task force is modeled. And he's going to give us a national perspective on this work. Now, Mr. Sandman served as president of the Legal Services Corporation from 2011 to 2020. He's currently a member of the District of Columbia Access to Justice Commission as well. He practiced law with Arnold and Porter for 30 years, served as the firm's managing partner for a decade, and he is a past president of the DC Bar, former general counsel for the District of Columbia Schools. He's the recipient of numerous pro bono civil rights and public service awards, and I think we have in our materials a link to his full bio. Mr. Sandman, we're really glad to have you here. Please take it away.
Thank you, Attorney General Prush. Thank you to all of you for inviting me to join you this morning. Congratulations on the very generous award for civil legal services. I was blown away by the recognition that reflects of the importance of civil legal services in a time like this, and of how creatively you were able to marshal the resources to make that happen. What a model you've set for the rest of the country. Thank you. I'd like to briefly describe the work of the American Bar Association's Pandemic Task Force, which was formed in mid-March. The task force has 40 members. 20 are representatives of various entities within the American Bar Association, broadly representative. They include people from the Judicial Division, the Real Estate Section, the Pro Bono Committee, the Standing Committee on Legal Aid and Indigent Defendants. 20 members are liaisons from outside organizations, including the Conference of Chief Justices, the National Center for State Courts, the National Legal Aid and Defender Association, and the Legal Services Corporation. Our job is to serve as a clearinghouse nationally of information about legal issues relating to the pandemic. We coordinate, we disseminate information about best practices, we share information. What we found when we were formed was that there was already a lot of good work being done in many pockets across the United States, all of it uncoordinated, where people were desperate for information about what others were doing so they could avoid duplication of effort and piggyback on the work and the knowledge of others across the United States. So we tried to centralize information to become a hub of information about legal issues relating to the pandemic. The first thing we did was to create a website. If you Google ABA Coronavirus Task Force, it will lead you right to it. I think it's the single most comprehensive resource for information about legal issues relating to the pandemic. We also decided to focus on 3 particular subject areas: court processes, evictions, and pro bono. Court processes, because all court systems across the United States were immediately confronted with issues of accessibility, protecting the health of court officials and court users, and identifying the best technology to help them meet needs in new circumstances. And we've had some success in sharing information that promote best practices in all of those areas. Let me give you an example of an innovation here in the District of Columbia, where I live, that I think has been a great benefit, not only during the pandemic, but that I hope will be beneficial going forward on a permanent basis. The courts of the District of Columbia have set up 5 neighborhood resource centers for people to go to when they need to access courts remotely. These centers are in existing District of Columbia government facilities. They have the right technology for people to be able to access court proceedings, good equipment, a strong Wi-Fi connection. Maybe most importantly, though, they offer people a quiet professional space to deal with the court. Even if you have the right equipment in your home, often under current circumstances, people are living in a multi-generational household where they may be short on space. They may be educating children at home. That is not a great environment to be able to participate in a court proceeding. But if you can provide an alternative space in the neighborhood that people can get to easily, it can provide them with very helpful access to court proceedings. As so many of you know, the requirement of in-person court appearances is itself a barrier to justice for many low-income people. When you have to arrange for childcare, when you have to arrange for transportation, when you have to take many hours off from work in what may be a low-wage job, getting to the courthouse can often be an insuperable barrier to justice for you. It's one of the reasons why the default rates in cases affecting low-income people are so high. So there's a creative example of a response by one local court system that I think has lessons going forward. Another area of focus after a court process is evictions. We did a survey back in May, a national survey that reached about 450 influencers, people who would have a keen sense of the greatest area of needs during the pandemic. And the two greatest areas of substantive legal needs were accessing benefits programs and getting help with evictions. People were finding it difficult to figure out what the eligibility criteria were for benefits programs, how to apply. Agencies that were handling benefits applications were overwhelmed and often not able to handle the applications coming in. People needed access to legal assistance to help them access benefits programs. In addition, back then, we were already seeing a spike in evictions and anticipated increases far greater when moratoria were expected to expire. We have a pretty good handle, we think, currently on access to benefits programs, but the issue of evictions is the largest looming issue nationally for legal need. That's been quelled, at least in the short term, by the eviction moratorium that the Centers for Disease Control implemented, but that is effective only until December 31st. More importantly, it's only a moratorium. It only delays, but does not prevent the eventual eviction of large numbers of people who are unable to afford rent. So our task force, through its eviction committee, concluded that the best way to try to approach this was to advocate for rent relief as a part of national, state, and local pandemic relief packages. We got the House of Delegates of the American Bar Association to adopt a resolution at the annual meeting in August in support of rent relief. That is direct payments to landlords on behalf of tenants who are unable to meet their rent obligations because of the pandemic, which would not kick the can down the road, but it would address the problem. With that resolution in hand, the American Bar Association was able to begin lobbying Congress to include rent relief in the next round of coronavirus relief legislation, whenever that passes. We were able to do this because our group brings together representatives not only of tenant groups, but of landlord groups. And landlords need to be paid. Contrary to the misimpression that many people have, the majority of landlords in the United States are not big commercial conglomerates. They're individuals, they're families who often rent out an apartment in a building that they own and also occupy. They're not big businesses. They have mortgage obligations, they have property tax obligations, they need to maintain the premises. Upkeep costs money. So our hope is that by getting rent relief adopted, we can cure the problem so that when the moratoria expire, landlords aren't faced with many, many months of rent obligations that they can't possibly meet and confront near certain eviction from their homes. We have seen some progress on this front already. In Texas recently, within the last 2 weeks, the governor allocated, I believe it was 170 or 180 million dollars of previously available funding from the federal government to rent relief, direct payments to landlords on behalf of tenants who've not been able to meet their rent obligations because of the pandemic. The third area we focus on is pro bono, which is a difficult thing to attack nationally because so much pro bono work has to happen at the local level. But we can serve at a coordinating function, and we've done two things. First, working with the Disaster Legal Services Program of the Young Lawyers Division of the American Bar Association, we created a national pro bono portal that matches lawyers who would like to provide pro bono service relating to the pandemic to opportunities that have been identified by legal services providers. The portal is searchable by subject matter, by geographic area. It permits a lawyer who is admitted to the bar in a particular state to identify quickly pro bono opportunities available in that state. It's particularly helpful in matching lawyers located in big metropolitan areas with pro bono needs in rural areas where there may be few, if any, lawyers to provide pro bono service. This too, we think, can be a national model going forward that will survive the pandemic and help to deal with the problem of so-called lawyer deserts, where there aren't any lawyers to provide even paid services, let alone pro bono services to people in need. The second thing we're doing is still a work in progress, but I hope will emerge shortly. It's to create a national network of state, local, specialty, and affinity bars across the country that have pro bono programs to get them up to speed on how to handle eviction cases when the expected tidal wave occurs after the first of the year. The president of the American Bar Association will, within the next couple of weeks, be sending out a letter to bar leaders across the United States, inviting them to join this network, to share information about the eviction crisis and effective strategies for handling the high volume of evictions that's expected. So that's the nature of our work. We serve a coordinating function. We focus on three particular areas: court processes, pro bono, and evictions. We look forward to doing anything we can to assist you. Consider us a resource for your work. We can connect you with people across the country dealing with the same problems you're dealing with in Maryland. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sandman. That was terrific. If anybody has a question, raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to you. Let me just look around. Here we go. Oh, Napur Flynn, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, this is Guy Flynn. My wife's name is on the Zoom.
Okay, sorry about that.
In any event, Jim, I just want to say that I've had the chance to work with you in my capacity as a lawyer at DLA Piper and as a member of the board of Maryland Legal Aid. But I really commend you for the activities that you just mentioned, most particularly your work with the ABA on the pro bono initiatives. And I want to say that we have had the good sense here on the task force's pro bono committee, which I co-chair with Hannibal Kammerer, to replicate a couple of these initiatives that you just described. In particular, the idea of an interactive portal that we are in the process of setting up to match lawyers with need, wherever that need may be throughout the state. And also with respect to your idea about mobilizing the various bar association affinity groups. So we're doing all of that along with mobilizing, quite frankly, the private bar. And there's obviously a great deal of pro bono activity happening among the law firms and elsewhere, including general counsel within corporations. So kudos to you, and those ideas that you just mentioned are ones that we are doing here within the task force on the pro bono committee. So thank you for all your work.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. One particular way you can help pro bono lawyers is providing easy to access training on a statewide basis. There is no reason why every legal services organization should have to undertake the burden of training all of the pro bono lawyers who might be coming through them. Landlord-tenant law is state law, and it is possible to create statewide training modules that are available on demand 24/7 when lawyers are able to access them from the comfort of their own homes to get up to speed on what they need to know to be able to handle an eviction case effectively. One other aspect of our pro bono work that I want to mention, this portal that I mentioned is searchable by subject matter area, by geography. It's also searchable in terms of time commitment, how much time you have available. What are you looking for? Can you handle a case from beginning to end? Or do you have only an hour or two you might be able to help? It allows targeted searches for people to be able to contribute as they're able. And that really promotes really good matchmaking and can take advantage of whatever time a pro bono lawyer might have to volunteer.
Thanks
Brian,
very much. Yes, Wilhelm.
Jim, good morning.
Good morning, Wilhelm. It's been a while.
And thank you for your efforts. You know, you did a damn good job when you, in these times, were able to achieve increasing funding from that Congress. That's an awesome job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank my board member, Guy Flynn, for all his work he is doing with the task force and with Marion Legal Aid. And we have hundreds of lawyers signed up and being trained and ready to go for this avalanche that we're expecting. And I want to thank Attorney General Brian Frosh. He pulled off a miracle here. We were expecting big trouble with the loss of funding from IOLTA and filing fee monies, and he pulled a rabbit out of the hat. And we will not be having any cuts in this fiscal year. So that was amazing. So thank you guys, and thank you for working with the ABA. We pledge to do our best on the ground, and we're ready to go.
Thank you, Wilhelm.
All right. Well, Mr. Sandman, thanks again. That was a great presentation. We're really impressed with your work, and we're going to continue to emulate it. I think at this point, we should move on, and let me turn it over to Rena. She's going to give us some task force updates. Rena Shaw.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Frosh, and thank you so much, Mr. Sandman, for joining us this morning. We continue the work. We emulated the task force that was formed on the national stage, and here we also have been doing a lot. In a lot of ways, we're building the plane as we're flying it, because we're trying to address the emergency needs as they're happening, while also thinking of the long-term needs, while setting up structures and other processes. As was mentioned at the top of the meeting, $11.7 million was designated to MLSC. I wanted to see if Susan Ehrlichman was on the call. She has been giving us updates in terms of the MLSC funding, and I wanted her to be able to talk briefly about how this will impact MLSC funding going forward. Susan, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Rena. And before I begin, I just have to echo the thanks to Attorney General Brian Frosh and, of course, to our governor for the action that they've taken to avert what would have been the most significant crisis in legal aid funding in Maryland's history. So I really can't overstate how important these funds are, particularly at this time. So I think, as most of you know, we continue to face significant funding decreases from IOLTA and filing fee surcharge revenue, which are two of our major funding sources. The board was facing imminent significant cuts to all of the legal aid providers across the state. So this funding, first and foremost, will eliminate the need for MLSC to cut any further. They had already reduced grants by 9% for fiscal year 21 when grant decisions were made in June. But then the picture just became rapidly worse. And so we have definitely, this is a total game changer for this fiscal year. And again, we really can't thank you enough. We're still looking at tremendous shortfalls, unfortunately, for fiscal year 22, but now we can focus on that. I do want to say we did learn yesterday or the day before from the state that the $3 million that has been provided is actually CARES Act money and is a response and an approval, a partial approval. We had requested $5 million of CARES Act money back in July, and this $3 million of that request has been provided and must be spent this calendar year. So that's just a little detail update, but it does just make a difference in how we spend the money. But we are eager to get started, and we are still, waiting for final agreements and clarification on some issues.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan, for that update. And, just as a reminder, when we sent as a task force the letter to the governor to request CARES Act funding, there were many different pots of money that we had requested in that letter. We had requested, the largest pot was obviously direct rental assistance, as Mr. Sandman was referring to. We had also requested money for social support services that, ensure that people have services before they, get to the point where they have to have a court case. And so that there were many other issues that remain, unaddressed from the task force's perspective. But this is definitely one very big accomplishment and something that I think helps us think about the future and really think about addressing civil legal needs that people may have immediately. Thank you for that update. One of the other things that Mr. Sandman addressed was that, there's a lot of confusion about different types of programs from the public. And there are a lot of new people that have to navigate these systems now. And so one of the key things that the task force has also been working on is having community forums on different topics that the task force is substantively covering. And so I'm going to turn it over to Karen Anderson-Scott and Franklin Baker from our Public Awareness and Community Engagement Committee, as they have been spearheading these community forums that share important information with the public on how to navigate some of these legal processes. Karen and Franklin?
Karen, if you can start.
Okay. It's not share screen. I don't want to do that.
Karen, why don't you try and talk for us now? Got you unmuted. Okay, her mic doesn't seem to be working at the moment. Why don't you, could you kick off for us and we'll see if we can fix it for her?
Sure. Thank you again so much, Rena, for giving us a few moments. I think one of the biggest reasons why the particular committee, the Public Awareness and Community Engagement Committee, was in place was to work with all of the substantive committees to ensure that all of the efforts that they're exploring are pushed out in a very reasonable way, time-sensitive way, but at scale to as many people throughout the state as possible to ensure that they're aware of the resources that are available to them, to ensure that they're clear on how this task force is designed to focus on meeting their needs every single possible way we can in all the spaces that we've been talking about today. And so we're really proud, actually, of the work that this committee has done in partnership with all the substantive committees. We've had several forums thus far, though the attendance on the live forums has not been extremely high. What we have been finding, which is really awesome, is that the afterglow, so to speak, of these particular live forums are really like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 numbers from people seeing it later, right? So our work has been in the last few weeks, what can we do to ensure that these community forums are getting the play afterward? So pushing through our various networks across the state, various categories of providers, affinity groups, people who really care about this work, the legal community, and so many other platforms to ensure that people are aware that presentations are being had to talk about housing concerns, exploitation, financial issues. So we are proud of the fact that, yeah, we got to a slow start because we were just trying to figure this whole thing out. Rena mentioned that someone mentioned that we are sort of doing this on the fly because of the time sensitivity. But we're now at a place where we have a cadence and a rhythm, which has been working very well. We have some upcoming forums scheduled for one just happened yesterday, the 14th. We have another one coming up on the 21st, the 28th, and we'll be continuing to open the possibility for additional forums to the extent that there's more information that can be shared out to the public around the work that's been done so wonderfully by the substantive committees as a part of this larger task force. I don't know if Karen, if you are ready to go at this moment.
We're working on having her call in with her phone at the moment.
Oh, great. So I think the long and short, Brian and Rena, is first of all, thank you to all of our core liaison substantive committee partners, because they have been sitting in on our PACE, Public Awareness and Community Engagement Committee meetings. They've been extremely attentive to what can they do to sharpen their presentations during these community forums. And we're grateful for Raquel and so many others who have been helping us behind the scenes with the Attorney General's office to ensure that these are first-rate presentations so people can go back later and pilfer through the various presentations of their choice and interests and capture information that's helpful. So extremely grateful for the partnership. It really does take a village, if you will, to ensure that we're covering all the bases, from Spanish coverage to English coverage, to ensuring that we're going throughout the state. I know we tend to be Baltimore-centric in many ways, but I'm glad to know that many of the efforts have been, what can we do on the Eastern Shore to ensure that the people there in South Maryland and Western Maryland are getting this information. And so we're grateful for all of your efforts, many of you who are on the call today, to help us to push out in a meaningful way substantive information that can be helpful for those we're targeting, which of course are those who have been impacted directly or indirectly by COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Franklin, for that report. I wanted to turn it over now to Roxana Wise and Roberto Valesso. In addition to the community forum, we had one of our committees that actually did a listening session. So the format was different. The community forum is really to share information, let people know how they can navigate the justice system, specific laws, share resources, etc. There was one committee that actually held a listening session to understand what the committee was facing, to make sure that their own work would reflect and their recommendations would reflect things that they might be missing from, just getting information from organizations that represent people. They went directly to the people. And so I wanted to turn it over to Roxana and Roberto to just share with the task force some takeaways that they might have gleaned from that particular listening session.
Thank you, Rena, and thank you everyone for your time. So to make it short and sweet, we heard from a number of members from the community, including Ashley B., who is a registered nurse with direct experience on hurdles patients, family members, and medical professionals encounter. 3 top recommendations that came from the first session includes serving essential workers in creating marketing materials of resources for life and health planning for these workers. Often overlooked are the healthcare workers on the front line, such as the technicians, the aides, and the nurses. And so providing life and health planning materials through either the state medical licensure or certification entities, such as Department of Health, Maryland Board of Nursing, et cetera. Those platforms are already used by medical professionals, and it would be a great way for essential workers to receive the pertinent information related to wills, estates, et cetera. The second recommendation focuses on serving patients and families affected by COVID-19. So considering ways to connect social workers, healthcare workers, and lawyers to life and health planning. Typically, when patients are in their last stage in life during the pandemic, family members or loved ones aren't there to comfort them or there to help with the paperwork. And typically social workers are available in the hospital facilities for patients in need of adult care or care generally. And so having some sort of identified legal liaison, a licensed attorney from the state who can work with social workers in the hospital setting can be helpful to reduce this type of barrier. That legal liaison can help walk the patient through the paperwork, so the advance directives, the wills, the power of attorney, and those kinds of things. And the last recommendation that came out that was very evident focuses on addressing cultural barriers, in particular for immigrants, foreign-born citizens. So providing life and health planning information to patients and their families, especially foreign-born, in a way that improves the level of care and compassion and sensitivity when it comes to these discussions is essential. Sometimes foreign-born families experience challenges when it comes to advocating for themselves. Life and health planning discussions are considered taboo in many cultures, and navigating US society is not the easiest when dealing with biases that others in perceived authority may have toward immigrants and those kinds of unspoken challenges. So developing training materials that help strengthens the compassion, care, and sensitivity when it comes to life and health planning is very critical to allow foreign-born families to be more comfortable when it comes to these discussions, families and patients. I'm going to turn it over to Roberto to speak about the second session.
Good morning, distinguished members of the task force. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you regarding the barriers to justice experienced by the Latino community with respect to life and health planning issues. My name is Roberto Veloso. By way of background, I'm an immigrant, one of a small number of bilingual attorneys in Anne Arundel County, so by necessity a community activist, and the chair of the Anne Arundel County Human Relations Commission. My involvement with the Life and Health Planning Committee has focused on giving the Latino community a voice in the process of developing strategies and solutions to life and health planning problems, particularly problems that have arisen because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The feedback I'm reporting on comes from my engagement mostly with Latino service providers and a few individuals that were willing to share their experiences during the pandemic. This feedback, unfortunately, does not come from the listening session we conducted because the Latino community is reluctant to communicate in public regarding their personal pandemic-related tragedies. It will come as no surprise that the major barrier to accessing justice faced by the Latino community centers around limited English proficiency. However, the problem is far more nuanced than that. The barriers to justice faced by the Latino community have more to do with literacy issues. And by that, I mean issues related to foundational literacy, financial literacy, digital literacy, and cultural literacy. These literacy issues result in the Latino community, particularly recent immigrants, struggling to understand what they need to do to effectively navigate the civil justice system as it relates to estate planning and probate matters. These literacy issues are also a factor that result in the recent immigrant Latino community being denied meaningful access to translation services at some Maryland hospitals when they need it the most when being faced with the COVID-19 related health emergency. These literacy issues also contribute to trust issues, which manifest themselves as a lack of trust of the courts, of government, and of the legal profession. As this task force moves forward with developing and implementing solutions to help the people of Maryland have greater access to justice, especially now during the pandemic, please remember the plight of many in the Latino community. Please remember that an effective boost from the task force to overcome these barriers must take into account the issues of foundational, financial, digital, and cultural literacy. Keep in mind that a solution that relies on technology does no good to someone with limited access to the internet, laptops, scanners, and printers. Lastly, don't underestimate the significant impact that mistrust has in the community. Any solution you develop must be implemented by working in tandem with trusted community partners that already have a relationship with the community. Thank you for convening the task force and the work that you're doing, and for the opportunity to share with you some of the challenges being faced by Maryland's Latino community. Go ahead and turn it over to Rena.
Yes, thank you so much, Roberto, and thank you, Roxana, for your thoughts and for your committee's work really to engage with the community directly and get these recommendations and solutions. One of the things that we have talked about over and over again in our committee's work is that we don't want to be reinforcing the things that were existing before and creating solutions that really would not have meaning in this space right now. So this work is very critical and important. We really appreciate that you're doing it and doing it, so passionately and engaging. We also, in addition to these community forums, these listening sessions, there are several surveys out in the field right now that the different committees have put out. So we have 2 surveys in the field. One is from the Surviving Abuse and Neglect Committee, and another one is from the Data and Legal Technology Committee. I'm going to turn it over to Delegate Bartlett and Shelley Mintz to talk about the survey that they have from the Surviving Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation Committee. Delegate Bartlett.
Thank you, Rena, and thank you, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you, Mr. Sandman, for being here today. I appreciate the presentation that Mr. Sandman provided and the inspiration to us. So our survey went out and is still live. It will stay live until for the next 3 weeks. To service providers as well as service recipients. And the purpose of the survey was to try to find out just how the pandemic has actually affected individuals who receive services such as housing or employment assistance, counseling, any benefits, even education, childcare, legal help, and immigration. So of the survey, of the individuals who completed the survey, 74% had actually sought out those services. And just so that you know, we are also sending out hard copies of the survey. Some hard copies have gone out. We're also sending out hard copies to be completed and to be distributed at a local food bank in Anne Arundel County. At this time, we've had 97 survey takers, and there has been approximately 69 respondents who are service seekers who have responded. We have had, looks like 37 service providers who have responded. I know that Shelley was having some trouble with her her audio. Oh, you're back. Okay, great. Great. So I'm going to let Shelley go through it. I just wanted to emphasize that housing numbers, those who were needing housing were high, assistance with benefits was high, living assistance was probably next in line. I'm sorry, food or meals were next in line, and then living assistance Education, services, medical help, and counseling all fall within there as well. So Shelley, I'll let you go ahead and.
Okay. Thank you so much, Delegate Bartlett. I first wanted to thank the Attorney General's office for helping us with printing for the hard copies. Thank you for that generosity. And I wanted to thank the PACE committee for helping us to distribute these surveys. Their assistance has been invaluable. We are, in getting it to service providers and recipients, we are trying to reach out to more. As Delegate Bartlett indicated, the survey is not quite midway through in its timing, and we do need to hear from more. And what was just said really resonated, because where the survey is available on SurveyMonkey in English and in Spanish, and the hard copies are available in both English and Spanish. But we really need assistance in getting responses from the Latino community, from our Spanish-speaking residents. We do need a lot of assistance there in getting those responses so that we can reach out, because services are needed. In responses that we received from providers who provide legal services, there has been during the pandemic an uptick in service requests from persons who are undocumented, from mistreated minors, and from sex trafficking victims. There have also been an uptick in services for child custody, immigration, and immigration detention. So those are all areas which our committee is looking into in terms of persons being abused, being neglected, being exploited. And many did report experiencing such abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and not necessarily being aware of the services that are available to them and out there for them. While most people realized that Child Protective Services was still active and doing investigations and bringing cases to the court, at least virtually in emergency situations during the pandemic, only 79% realized that the same was true of Adult Protective Services. And that is a huge population, serving all persons over the 18 and over who are vulnerable adults and have been abused, neglected, or exploited, or where there is a suspicion of such. So we are looking at how we can better communicate with those populations to let people know that those services remain available even during a time of shutdown. The survey is ongoing, and we are hoping that if anyone in this meeting feels that they can be of service in getting the survey out, it is on SurveyMonkey. The link is on the task force's website, and Delegate Bartlett, myself, members of our committee would be happy to help in getting you hard copies if needed. We've had requests from many of the social services agencies, and we'd like to reach out to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Thank you so much, Delegate Bartlett. We really appreciate it. Of course, all of this information is available on the website. As Shelley mentioned, the link is there. If there are any particular, if there's any particular ability for us to promote it more through the task force, we will certainly forward you that information. We also have another survey that is out from the Data and Legal Technology Committee. It deals with court access issues. And so I'm going to turn it over to Wendy Schiff from that committee to speak briefly about the purpose of the survey, why it's important for the work of the task force. I do have a note this morning that we released the survey last week. It was only open for a 2-week window, and we have over 330 responses as of this morning, which is great. And we still have a couple of more days for that. So Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you to speak about that survey.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rena. And the dog always barks as soon as I start talking on Zoom, which is part of the problem of digital access. There are lots of distractions in our households. And so what we wanted to, our intent by this survey is to find out what is actually happening in the courts vis-a-vis not what the courts have ordered. The courts have issued multiple orders about what should be happening in the courts, the type of sanitation, distancing, precautions that are in place for hearing, aside from access for the lawyers, their clients. What we wanted to determine is what the actual experiences of lawyers in different counties and different courts are, because as everyone would expect, what's going on in Baltimore City may not be the same thing that's going on in Anne Arundel County or Allegheny County or Wycomico County. So we created this survey to find out what people's actual experiences were, just simply first on entering courthouses, on being in courthouses, and both in-person hearings and remote hearings, because many of the hearings are being done remotely, but the courts have opened up for in-person hearings. One of our challenges is that in-person hearings just started over the summer. They revved up at the end of August, and jury trial started about a week and a half ago. So we have a limited pool of information because most courthouses have had only a few jury trials that have been scheduled. The first date that a jury trial could go forward was the 5th of October. So we issued the survey as late as we possibly could to get meaningful responses. And as Rena said, we have over 330 responses to date. Approximately half of the responses are from people who have actually been in courts. So that's significant for us. A lot of lawyers have not had hearings yet. The committee has collected our anecdotal experiences, but we're a limited group of attorneys. So we wanted to find out what else was going on throughout the state. The survey is open until tomorrow at midnight. If you would like a copy of the survey, if you have people you would like to share the survey with, we are happy to provide you with access to the site for the survey. If you actually respond to all of the questions thoughtfully, it should not take you more than 8 to 10 minutes to complete. And we thank everybody who has given us input about the contents of the survey and input and has assisted us with distribution of the survey. We will be including those results in our recommendations.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And thank you so much to all the committees that are working so hard and for the leadership from the co-chairs. So really appreciate all the work that's going on. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Attorney General Frosch. We're going to get into the short-term recommendations, the letters that are before us, and also the long-term recommendations.
Okay, thanks very much, Rena, and thanks for all the presenters of those updates. It's terrific work, so thank you very much. In a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Judge Andre Davis to lead us through a discussion of our current recommendations. But I wanted first to talk about the 3 letters that we circulated for your review, I think earlier this week. 2 went out on Tuesday, 3rd yesterday, And I want to thank particularly our Food and Economic Security Committee co-chairs Carno Evans and Paul Cucuzella for developing the first two letters that we'll talk about. And although most of the requests set forth in the letters are included in the current list of recommendations from the task force, they address urgent needs, and we thought it was probably important to issue them before the task force report is finalized. Now, some of these recommendations in the letters may require federal approval. Some may require state legislation. And so what we're asking for is action to the extent that it's possible now, and for the agencies to keep their eye on the ball so that later, when the pieces fall into place, as we hope, they'll be able to act more swiftly. So the first letter is directed to the Department of Human Services, and it urges the agency to take specific steps to maximize the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP as it's called, and also TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. The recommendations include allowing Maryland Senior Nutrition Assistance Program recipients to receive maximum benefits allotted retroactively to April of 2020, and allowing the SNAP and TANF beneficiaries to receive the full month benefit for the month when the application is submitted, rather than the benefit prorated based on whatever day in the month the application was dated. Because these needs are urgent and subject to your approval, the letter will go out on behalf of the task force quickly, but I want to open the floor for discussion of the DHS letter and hear whether there are any questions, concerns, criticism, etc. Anybody raise your hand or wave or put something in the chat? I'm scanning back and forth on the pages. I don't see any comments or questions. I guess without objection, we'll approve and send the letter. Thanks. Okay, the second letter is directed to the Secretaries of Labor and Health, and it proposes a three-pronged strategy to ensure that Marylanders who lose their employer-sponsored health insurance are able to access, enroll in quality, affordable health insurance. The letter urges the Department of Labor to incorporate health insurance, a checkbox in applications for unemployment insurance, and then to connect the individuals who are seeking information about affordable health care with the resources at the Maryland Health Benefits Exchange. It also urges the agency to launch a communications campaign to inform the public about free, low-cost health insurance and free health insurance, and what options are available through the Health Connections website. Currently, the letter, as it was sent to you, the letter copies the executive director of the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange. We'll amend that so that the letter includes her as a direct recipient. And like the DHS letter, assuming you approve, the letter would be sent on behalf of the task force in the next few days. Anybody have any comments, questions, amendments? I see some thumbs up. Anyone else? Okay, without objection, then we'll send that letter. Thank you. And finally, the third letter comes to us from the Housing Security Committee, and thank you to the co-chairs Zafar Shah and Zach Shirley. This letter urges the Department of Housing and Community Development to take 2 actions in support of eviction prevention. First, implement a communications campaign that encourages renters facing eviction to go to court, and it would educate them on the potential defenses available under the governor's executive order and the CDC order. The second piece would ask them to compile and post data on their website regarding the availability of funds and eligibility for participating in local rental assistance eviction prevention programs. In essence, creating a one-stop shop for renters and stakeholders in search of these resources. It's a straightforward, but we think important request. On this one, questions, comments, objections? Okay, I don't see any. Hearing no objections, we'll send the third letter as well. Thanks so much for your consideration of this stuff. I think we're now ready, Judge Davis, to walk through the draft recommendations. Would you lead the members through the list?
Thank you very much, Mr. Attorney General. Let me start by joining you and others who've commented on just how extraordinarily hardworking the members of the committee, certainly the co-chairs of the committee have been. It's really been an extraordinary observation and dedication on their part to the work that you've convened here. And kudos to you for proactively seeking to provide the services that the people of this state so desperately need. But I would be remiss as well if I didn't take just a moment and thank my co-vice chair, Rena Shaw, for just incredible work that Rena has been doing in marshaling the many resources that you have brought together on this task force. And many of you will know that when you get emails from your vice chair at 4:28 in the morning, you know she's working really hard for the people. And Rena, really hats off to you for the extraordinary work you're doing. So the work has just been remarkable. And again, I thank the co-chairs of all of the committees. And I'll remind you, those of you on the task force and any members of the public who may be listening in, we have 10 committees. The Policy and Race Equity Committee serves as something of a clearinghouse, if you will, for the work of the substantive committees, the other committees. And let me just remind you what they are: civil legal aid funding, consumer protection, data and legal technology, economic and food security, housing security, life and health planning, policy and race equity, as I mentioned, pro bono and reduced fee legal services, public awareness and community engagement, and surviving abuse, neglect, and exploitation. I think we got the field covered, Mr. Attorney General, and certainly the work of these committees has demonstrated that we've got the field covered. You'll recall in our last meeting, we presented draft recommendations looking to the end of the year report that the task force will issue. And as we took into account the recommendation, the comments that we heard at the last meeting, and as we conducted further dialogue with committee chairs and members of committees and asked questions, sometimes hard questions, looking to make sure that the work of the committee was lining up with the mission of the task force. It was an iterative process, a rich discussion, among us on the committees. And what we've come up with is, I think, a better organizing format for proposed recommendations. So as you see from the draft that you've received, we have broken out the many recommendations into 4 general categories. And I'll just remind you what they are. 1, mitigate access to justice barriers through substantive changes and due process reforms. 2nd, improve emergency responses. 3rd, increase public awareness and access to information and resources. And then finally, increase funding and resources. And so while the committee's work to a certain extent fell into nice categories, what we discovered in further dialogue with the committee chairs and among ourselves on the Policy and Race Equity Committee is that there was some overlap, and that many of the recommendations fit nicely together around these organizing structures. So that's what we propose to do. Within these 4 broad categories, you see listed really 11 or 12 specific recommendations with sub or more detailed recommendations. As we went through the recommendations, I have to tell you our default position was leave it in unless there was some really compelling reason not to. We respected the work of the committee and the committee co-chairs. As I say, they answered our questions, and almost without exception, the committees provided very detailed justifications for nearly every recommendation that was made. I refer to it as legislative history, if you will. But really, while what you have in front of you or what you received earlier this week are simply black letter recommendations, I assure you that behind those black letter recommendations is a lot of thought and, frankly, a lot of written explanation and justification for those recommendations. So the work of the committee is reflected in these recommendations, but the depth of consideration that was given to these recommendations may not be. We have not yet decided, of course, and our last meeting will be next month. We have not yet decided how much of the detailed justification for any particular recommendation will be necessary to make our final report a complete whole. So that will be a part of our ongoing discussions with the committee chairs and among the committees to see what the final report should look like. So we welcome your thoughts on these recommendations. We'll just walk through them, and the Attorney General will call on whoever wants to be heard. So I'll start with number 1, again, looking to enhance substantive and procedural protections for consumers at risk of eviction and foreclosure. Obviously, one of the top of mind concerns that we have, as we heard from Jim Sandman, this is a concern not just in Maryland, but around the country. Some of these recommendations you've seen before, but some you will not have seen before. And most particularly the worker protection recommendations that we'll get to in a moment have not previously been put before you. So we're looking to really make recommendations to increase protections to defendants in civil actions and foreclosure matters and in writ cases in ways that we think will increase access to justice for large numbers of people, particularly those at risk of losing their housing. We're recommending a pre-filing notice in the real property article, as you can see, as a part of recommendation number 1. We're recommending that a bifurcated adjudication process be implemented through either an administrative order or through legislation, if that is necessary, to create 2 tracks of adjudication for uncontested rent actions and those that are contested. We think that that would be down to the benefit of all parties in this realm. One of the things that we think and hope the task force will think is important, and that is to give judges greater authority to manage the rent cases throughout the process. There seems to be a notion that once a judge makes a decision in a rent collection case and the warrant of restitution issues, the judge loses authority over the case. And we don't think that that's necessarily so, but even if it is so, if that's the better view of what the law provides, we're going to be urging serious consideration in the legislature to give judges extended control over rent actions so that, for example, for good cause shown, a warrant of restitution can be stayed or extended. What underlies this, I think we can all understand. Nobody wants to be evicted. Nobody wants to be evicted. What people want is help. And people want the time to seek that help, as we've discussed earlier this morning. And there are instances, many instances I would posit, when people are able to satisfy their obligations to a landlord, sometimes later than they would like, but those obligations can be satisfied. And so some changes to the law to give judges broader discretion, as I say, after the entry of a judgment of restitution, to control the timing and the process for the execution of that judgment. We think it's very important that counsel be provided in most, if not all, rent actions. It's been discussed repeatedly how the moratorium is an affirmative defense in a rent action. It is not self-executing, and judges are not required sua sponte, on their own, without prompting, to bring up the question of the moratorium. And unfortunately, many vulnerable people facing eviction actions, as we discussed earlier today, don't fully appreciate the importance of showing up in court and raising defenses. And we need lawyers in that process to do that for litigants. The loss of housing needs to be recognized under Maryland law as one of the most profoundly harmful loss one of our citizens or residents can suffer. And we need to respond by urging the legislative bodies to create a right to counsel in this area. And we need data. The need to collect data, including demographic data, which admittedly can be difficult. It should be a shared responsibility of the courts and of the executive branch. We need data on evictions by zip code and by jurisdiction so that resource allocations are better informed and we can better identify those who are most in need of assistance. Let me stop there and see, Mr. Attorney General, if there are any comments from any of our task force members regarding this branch of the recommendations.
I don't see any hands up, nothing in the chat box. You can also, I think we can do this in an orderly way. If somebody wants to say something, unmute yourself and let us know what you're thinking.
The next part of recommendation in this tranche, actually recommendation number 2, deals with the problems facing people brought into district court on often small claims and other consumer debt type of claims. And we're proposing to make some aggressive recommendations in this area as well. For example, should body attachments be used in post-judgment proceedings arising out of consumer debt? In this day of internet and digital access to information, one would be hard pressed to imagine that a creditor would not be able, for example, to uncover assets and activities of a debtor through the use of online availability of online search engines. And it's not clear to us, frankly, that a body attachment is the appropriate treatment of an individual who loses her job, is at risk of losing her housing, at least at a time in an emergency. And so among these recommendations is a recommendation to prohibit the use of body attachments in consumer debt cases, and certainly at a time of an emergency, such as the pandemic. And there are other specific recommendations included in this provision. Mr. Attorney General, how about reducing the central collection units take on collection actions for the state? 17% has been the number since 1992. Perhaps a 6% default rate is more appropriate, and we're going to be urging consideration for that kind of change. We talked in the last meeting about the need to tweak certain court forms, and we heard from our friends in the judiciary that there exists a committee, and we would urge the court to welcome further input on how these forms can be made more accessible to lay people. Obviously, there's only so much you can do in explaining sometimes complex legal doctrines and principles to lay people, but we think that there's probably more that we can do in that area. I'll pause and see if there's any.
I don't see any, and just to answer your question, for me personally, 17% is just hugely outsized. And I think that reducing that to the judgment rate, it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Recommendation number 3 relates to health and life planning issues, and these issues take have particular cogency around the time of the pandemic, but like so many of these recommendations, would actually be improvements in access to justice at a time other than during an emergency. So one of the recommendations is to make permanent a number of the governor's COVID-19 executive orders relating to access to court, signatures for court, the limited power of attorney, and the ability of vulnerable populations to transfer property through the estate process and otherwise without the additional burdens of costs that many of our vulnerable citizens are not able to pay. Recommendation number 4 is focused on the matters that the Attorney General has already mentioned in significant part, and we've approved the letter to go out regarding the SNAP and TANF processes, as well as the Medicaid requirements. on unemployment insurance, we think that the state has made a number of efforts to improve the unemployment insurance process, but we think further improvements can be and should be made in that process. The voters can check online and confirm that their mail-in ballots have been received, and they can check online and determine that their mail-in ballots have, that their request for ballots have been received, as well as that their ballot has been received and processed. And it seems to us, really, there's no reason the state can't do the same thing for unemployment insurance processing claims. If you can check your ballot, why not be able to check your unemployment insurance application for benefits online and resolve some of the issues that we all know are current. So any comments so far? Excellent. We're confident that the Department of Human Services will promptly seek federal approval where that is needed to implement the recommendations, the short-term urgent recommendations regarding benefits that are embodied in the letter. And we will be following up together with the Attorney General to see how we can urge that process along. We want improvements to the already excellent, I think most of us would agree, healthcare portal in Maryland to facilitate a quicker and easier enrollment for those who are suddenly met with a loss of job and thus the loss of employee provided health insurance. There are, again, digital processes that can be put into place so that people who encounter these kinds of sudden emergency losses of health insurance can be picked up by the system far more quickly and avoid any gap in coverage. Anything anybody want to opine or suggest? We had a good discussion, very informative discussion about the need for a vulnerable adult registry as a part of this improvement in substantive and procedural due process. And the concern is that while there is a registry of persons who should not be working in childcare and in other areas where children may be exposed to inappropriate conduct by caregivers and others, there is no such registry related to those who have been identified as inappropriate providers of service for vulnerable adults. It's a gap in the law, and the committee feels very strongly that it's a gap that the state ought to close. And so we think that that's a very, very important step to take to protect vulnerable adults. The next tranche of recommendations fall under the heading of improved emergency response. And so we, as you can see in those recommendations, we think the state can do more to broadcast information and to protect employees from the harms that arise from highly contagious diseases such as COVID, and to take additional steps to ensure that our state agencies such as MOSH and the Department of Labor take appropriate steps to protect employees at a time of emergent harm, such as in the context of a pandemic. These will require legislative change and revisions that we hope to have spelled out by the time the legislature convenes in January. One of the things we hope to accomplish is a change that will explicitly authorize the Attorney General, the Office of the Attorney General, to enforce workplace safety regulations. We think it would be a good idea to have additional eyes beyond what's already provided for in state law on how and whether employers are taking appropriate steps to protect employees in the workplace. We think that enhancements to state whistleblower protection laws would be appropriate so that employees, and we've heard some anecdotes in the last 5 or 6 or 7 months, employees who believe that there are dangerous conditions in the workplace ought to be assured through positive law in the Maryland Code that when they provide appropriate information through appropriate channels to help protect their fellow workers, that they will not be retaliated against or otherwise harmed. And this is especially true, the committee, I think, correctly recommends for many low-wage workers, essential workers, who desperately need the work, but who are concomitantly desperately afraid that speaking up could get them kicked out. So these kinds of protections, we think, were not before you before, but we think that they're important to include in our final recommendations. Of course, a sick leave eligibility and sick and safe leave in particular, family type leave, needs to be enhanced so that people in the context certainly of a pandemic or other broadly impactful adverse event can take care of their families, maintain their own safety, and come back to a job that's still there for them when the emergent situation has abated. I'll pause and see if there are any comments. Okay, again, I'll reiterate, we have not decided how much of the detailed justification for any of these recommendations will actually appear in the final written report. My suspicion is that the task force's report will likely have a number of appendices and exhibits. And so part of the work we'll be doing is deciding what goes into the body of the report, which we contemplate will be about 40 pages. No final decisions have been made, of course. But we may want to expand on some of the justifications, as I say, some of the legislative history of our recommendations in the form of an appendix or one or more appendices or exhibits. The next set of recommendations come under the heading Increased Public Awareness and Access to Information and Resources. And you've heard the earlier discussion of the town halls and the listening sessions, the surveys. It's so very important that we give information to people at a time and in a manner and in a language that makes it as certain as humanly possible that that information is received, understood, and that people are pointed in the right direction to get the help that they need. And so the first part of this is the collection of data. We need data on evictions. We need data on debt actions. We need data on protective orders. We need data on probate. We need demographic data. We need zip code data. And we can only make sound policy recommendations, and the legislature and the executive branch agencies can only do the work that the data informs them needs to be done. You can't address what you can't measure. And so it's important that we really urge all instruments of state government to be laser focused on the collection of data so that that data can inform policy and we can take evidence-based approaches to addressing access to justice issues in our state. We've spent a lot of time talking about single point of entry, the hotline resources that are available so far, and whether we can improve that. It's important that people, when they seek help, get clear answers and hopefully definitive instructions on where to go for the particular problem that they face. We believe that the 211 system is an excellent one, and we're looking at whether it can be improved. We believe the courts, in fact, the judiciary, speaking of collecting data, does collect just tons of data, makes it available online, and we've received those reports for the last 4 or 5 years, and they're rich with data. We think that kind of approach should inform the work of executive branch agencies as well as nonprofits and other agencies whose work is designed to increase access to those who are vulnerable. If you have thoughts about that, we'd really love to hear, well, we'd love to hear from you on any of these, but the issue of the single point of entry, how we might be able to improve or marry what the courts have done with other enhancements. We'd like to have a hotline that's a real hotline that directs people to the real resources that they need. Finally, increased funding and resources. And I have to say, Susan, we apologize. Through an inadvertent editing error, we actually failed to include a very important recommendation from the Legal Services Committee, legal funding. And the committee specifically, in addition to what you see in your draft as recommendations number 11, supporting full funding of the Federal Legal Services Corporation and funding for support providers, we actually intend to recommend that the state, the governor, include every year in the proposed budget a line item providing funding specifically for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. It's so important, as we've discussed earlier, that the funding streams for legal services in this state be held harmless. And one way to make sure that happens is to have a legislative enactment in the form of the budget that makes certain that the funding needed to provide access to justice of our vulnerable citizens and residents is not ever called into question as much as humanly possible. The recommendation includes a recommendation for increasing the interest rates on IOLTA funds that Maryland lawyers must maintain in their trust accounts, and simply to create a permanent revenue stream, as I say, in the form of a legislative enactment in the budget for public for legal services in Maryland. We're going to have lots for the legislature to consider, Delegate Bartlett, as you well know, and we're going to be looking to all of you on the task force come January and before to help inform us how we might best proceed to implement the final recommendations that we put before the task force approximately a month from now at our November meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Yes, please.
This is Franklin Baker. Thank you so much for an incredible presentation and overview. And of course, kudos to all the committee members across the task force that put in the hard work, sweat equity to develop these thoughtful recommendations. I just wanted to ask a follow-up note around, first of all, it's exciting to hear the funding for the Maryland Legal Services Initiative. And I know Susan is very elated, and Wilhelm and so many others tied to that funding. I wanted to know if a parallel effort might be considered for whichever central portal, whichever avenue the task force decides to go in relative to making sure that there's ongoing sustainable funding for whether it's 211 or whatever the specific idea is, because that's an equal opportunity to ensure that not every year we're trying to ensure that there's closure of gaps relative to that particular support to the community. And so I know that the 211 apparatus is doing their own efforts, with the legislature, and you may be aware of that, to try to ensure that it happens, but there could be some additional moxie that this task force could apply, similar to what was done with Susan's group. Just a thought, and again, whatever I can do in my role with United Way in partnership with 211, if that is the portal or some combination thereof, whichever the decision point is, I'd be certainly glad to leverage my influence in helping that as well. But I just wanted to put that out there because I think it's a similar idea, right, to what was done for the Legal Services Group.
Absolutely, Franklin, and your point is very well taken, and indeed, Marceline is making the same point I think that you're making in the chat. Perhaps we can.
Dog is too, right?
Luna agrees with your observation. Perhaps we'll certainly take this up in the committee and discuss whether there's a way we can expand this legislative initiative to include 211 as well as other legal providers.
Yeah, thank you. I just made the same point in the chat, Judge Davis, that there are a number of legal support services, financial counseling and coaching that are seeing increased demand before people get to the collection stage on debts and other issues that, have not received any additional funding and are seeing 300, 400, 500% increase in demand for their services. So to be able to serve and meet the need, we'd love to have that similar kind of consideration or initiative.
Absolutely. We welcome any other comments, observations.
I have one. So I would agree with all of that as well. And also if there, and I just text a colleague about some of this conversation that we're having so that we can get ready. And this person actually happens to be on a committee that could make some of these decisions sooner than they would get to judiciary voting, which they never will, of course. But I wanted to, we had a conversation yesterday, and I think that Mr. Sandman mentioned it in his report with the ABA Coronavirus Task Force. And he mentioned that DC, I believe, had provided large centers in which individuals who do not have access to the internet or reliable access could go to these large facilities and have equipment as well as reliable internet access. that came up yesterday in our Surviving Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation Committee. That's something that I think that if DC has already done it, then we have a model. But it's something that Maryland should, we perhaps would want to look at and provide funding for, because that has been something that we have found that some individuals either didn't have the computer skills, didn't know where to get it, didn't know when the courts were open, when they were closed, how to access to certain forms, legal forms, all of that. So that's something that we might want to consider as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions, comments, objections to any of the recommendations? Well, first, I want to thank Judge Davis. That was a great presentation. Those were, I mean, a lot of topics, all complex. I thought distilled brilliantly, and we appreciate the hard work that underlies that great presentation. And for the committees as well, thank you very much. This is great stuff. We appreciate your hard work. And for everybody on the task force, thank you. We encourage continued feedback on this draft. It's a work in process. It's not over. So if you have additional recommendations, and I say this to the members as well as the committees, we want to look at those and continue to consider them. We're going to have our last meeting this year before the legislative session on November 12th. And at that point, we will try to finalize the report. We do expect to have new proposals at that meeting as well. But continue to review this latest iteration and give us your thoughts, questions, concerns. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the order before we adjourn?
Mr. Attorney General, I have a question.
Yeah.
Danielle Crittenden, I'm co-chair of the Life and Health Planning Committee. There are a number of suggested legislative ideas for the task force to consider. And what I'm wondering is whether you think that there's going to be bandwidth in the General Assembly this year to consider all of these proposed ideas. Is this task force going to maybe determine a hierarchy of priority for some of the proposed ideas? As you know, it takes time to draft legislation and then get sponsors, unless there's some other process here that I'm not aware of. So I'm just curious. We've put in a lot of time in the Life and Health Committee coming up with ideas. Some legislation has already been drafted by other organizations that we are aware of, in which we hope that the task force will support. But knowing how quickly things have to happen during the session, I'm just curious as to what the plan might be. If you could comment, please.
So the good news is we have a number of very able legislators on the task force. Delegate Bartlett, foremost among them, but I think that Senator Carter is represented here this morning, and the other legislative members of the task force, I think I hope will be advocates for the recommendations, whether they are or not. And they may find some more to their liking than others, and may take them up as their own initiatives. But we'll be looking for sponsors for the other recommendations. We'll be talking to the leadership and of the General Assembly, and trying to advance the recommendations of the task force during the legislative session. I'm sure that we will each have our favorite recommendations, and I would encourage folks to push hard the ones they like the most. Our office will be active in promoting the recommendations as well. They won't just drop into an abyss. We're going to make sure that they're put on the table for the General Assembly to look at, and we hope to enact. So thanks for that. Thanks for that question.
Mr. Attorney General, may I add one thing there?
Yeah.
As I mentioned in the chat, there are some, because there were some particular bills that, as you mentioned, that or suggestions that I favored. And I asked some of my colleagues if anyone is already working on them. And there is a group of eviction type bills that are being put forth. And I think many are perhaps a result of the task force. I would say to the task force that our pre-file deadline is November 1st. So, and that is the date in which we have to request a pre-file. That is not the date that we have to actually have the bill in hand. So if possible, at least if we could get it into drafting or get the bill request into drafting, and then we can always make changes and things of that sort. Our bill drafters are excellent, as you know, Mr. Attorney General. We could provide almost 3 sentences and they're able to provide an excellent draft from there. And then last, I will say that we were advised in the General Assembly, in the House, that we should try to have a co-sponsor or a Senate sponsor for each and every bill. That's not usually the norm, but in this case, they are asking us to have a Senate sponsor for everything, a cross-file sponsor for everything, so that it will move, hopefully more expeditiously, as opposed to, and we can actually pass things just in case there's some quick abbreviation to session again or something of that sort. So that's just some information I just wanted to share with everyone.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, let me say thanks to the vice chairs, Rena Shaw, Judge Andre Davis. You guys are amazing. You're doing a great job. Appreciate the presentations this morning. And same to all of the members of the task force, especially the committee chairs. I know an awful lot of work has gone into this, and I think it's bearing fruit. So I think that's it for the day. Thanks for your great work. Be positive, test negative, and we'll see you on November 12th.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Franklin. I saw your note. Thank you.
Thank you.